Welcome back. We are engaged in a very thoughtful, extended, and important conversation with Douglas J. Feith, formerly the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, among other things. He worked in other capacities in the Defense Department, the National Security Council. He is currently a senior fellow with the Hudson Institute, a highly regarded institution in Washington, D.C., and the director of its Center for National Security Strategies. You can find his writings both at the hudson.org website and frequently on the pages of outstanding publications like the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Washington Post, and so on. He is the author of the single best book on the War on Terror. I call it The War for the Free World, but it is the subtitle of his book entitled War and Decision: Inside the Pentagon at the Dawn of the War on Terrorism. He was not only inside the Pentagon, he was one of its preeminent figures in strategizing and executing the plan for dealing with the war that was thrust upon us with 9/11. Doug Feith, again, thank you so much for your time today. You've laid the groundwork brilliantly in terms of how we got here. Let's talk about where we are now and where we're likely to be as a result of this deal. And there are 5 things that I'd like to particularly ask you to address about it, quite apart from the issues that are generally discussed, notably that the infrastructure remains in place and verification is mostly, as you've taught me, a matter of looking under the lamplight like the drunk who dropped his keys someplace else, but the light's better there. Missing, therefore, the real possibilities, in fact, likelihood that there will be a lot of stuff going on in Iran that we won't be privy to. But let me ask you about 5 specific things. The first is that we now find ourselves, as a result of this agreement, committed to help actually advance Iran's nuclear program, including by bringing to bear advanced nuclear reactor technology and the like, and assistance from the so-called international community. What are the implications of that?
Well, one of the one of the flaws in the approach to nonproliferation for many years has been the idea that when countries promise not to develop nuclear weapons, that various other countries around the world will commit to helping them develop peaceful nuclear technologies. And unfortunately, this has been used by cynical governments to extract important nuclear technology that bad governments then use for improper military purposes. And that basic idea continues in this agreement, and so there are provisions in here for countries to feel obliged to help the Iranians develop nuclear technology that the Iranians promise they will not use for improper purposes, but we know from their history they have violated promises of that kind.
Notably, the North Koreans come to mind, and I was struck by the news this morning that the North Koreans have said they're not interested in a deal like the Iranians have, having had a deal like that already, as you know, under the Clinton administration, Doug, which has left them with actually a nuclear weapons program, full stop. Doug, there are 2 other facets of this deal that don't have anything to do with the nuclear program per se, that we were told were therefore outside of the ambit of these negotiations, and yet it seems as though very, very ominous concessions were made, namely with respect to the embargoes on Iran's access to conventional arms imports and also ballistic missile technologies and activities. What are, again, the implications of those concessions?
I think those really are among the most outrageous aspects of a shockingly bad deal. And the argument that they are outrageous is supported by what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, President Obama's own chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said just a few days before the deal was concluded, when he was asked in front of a congressional panel about the possibility that the United States might lift the the restrictions on sales of conventional weapons and missiles to Iran, and he said he described maintaining those restrictions as a red line for him, implying that he couldn't support the agreement if those restrictions were removed, but the deal did in fact remove those restrictions. And you in your question highlighted the fact that these are not tied closely to the nuclear program. I mean, there was what the administration did was it justified not raising a long list of problems that we have with Iran that are really crucial to our whole strategic difficulty with the Iranian regime. It justified not raising those issues on the grounds that it was going to be focused narrowly on the nuclear issue. Then at the last minute, the Iranians and the Russians demanded that things that would be beneficial to Iran that were not tied closely to the nuclear program, like the conventional weapons restrictions and the missile restrictions, should be brought into the deal. And the Obama administration said yes. So when it came to things that would be beneficial to us that were not directly related to the nuclear deal, the administration left those things out, but at the last minute was willing to grant bringing in some concessions that were beneficial to Iran. It's really that really is really one of the most troubling aspects of this very troubling deal.
And both of us have sort of suggested that these things like ballistic missiles don't have anything to do with the nuclear program, except, of course, they are the delivery system of choice for a nuclear weapons program. And I think it's fair to say that in the absence of a nuclear weapon, having an intercontinental range ballistic missile doesn't make much sense. And we're clearly going to see that capability coming along under the Iranian efforts and perhaps aided and abetted by an international community that will perhaps quite soon be capable of giving them a hand, all intensifying the threat to this country, of course.
And their ability to advance their missile program, missiles that could eventually reach us, is enormously increased by the large sums of money they're going to get through the lifting of the sanctions.
And that's really what I wanted to hit again. We've discussed, Doug, elsewhere, the chairman of the Oversight Committee of the House Ways and Means Committee, Congressman Pete Roskam, says the equivalent amount in the U.S. economy, which is, of course, much larger than Iran's, of a $150 billion windfall would be $8 trillion. That suggests a massive increase in the ability of the Iranians, as you've said it earlier, to engage in all manner of activities, including those that threaten us, another very troubling facet of this. Let me ask you finally, Doug, one of the things that I guess came about at the very, very end of the end game, another astonishing concession, has to do with not only advancing, as we've discussed, the Iranian nuclear program, but actually committing to protect it. What is up with that?
Well, this entire deal takes a program that had made Iran for many years a pariah state in the world and the subject of United Nations resolutions that required countries, actually obligated all UN members to cut their economic ties to Iran. It turns that program that had made Iran into a pariah into a completely legitimate program that is entitled to the kind of protection that every country has for its legitimate activities.
With the help of the international community in this case. That's the thing that just boggles my mind, is that we're finding ourselves taking on responsibilities to take that same pariah state qualifying program and make it now something that we're investing in protecting. Doug, we have to pause for just a moment. When we come back, I want to talk about, having set the stage as you have masterfully, what this is likely to mean in terms of actually increasing the prospects of war in the Middle East and perhaps beyond. Douglas J. Feith, our guest, back with that and more straight ahead.